Chapter Wrap Up: Real Estate Planning, Public and Private Land Use Control, and Environmental Oversight. In the previous sections, we explored how zoning shapes land use, how deed restrictions govern private development, and how environmental laws protect natural resources and public health. Real estate planning ties these concepts together by providing the long-term framework that guides growth, development, and land use decisions in every community. Planning determines where growth should occur, what types of uses are appropriate, and how infrastructure and services will support that growth. Without a clear planning structure, zoning becomes inconsistent. Private restrictions conflict with community needs, and environmental laws are triggered too late. Real estate planning therefore acts as the foundation on which all other land use mechanisms operate. It brings zoning, subdivision controls, building codes, environmental regulations, and long-term community goals under one coordinated vision. By understanding this broader framework, real estate professionals can better explain development patterns, anticipate regulatory requirements, and help clients make informed decisions. Real estate planning begins with identifying the long-term goals of a community: the highest and best use of land, preservation of property values, public health and safety, and controlled growth are central objectives. Cities must consider traffic, schools, utilities, open space, drainage, environmental limits, and the desires of residents. The planning process typically includes developing a master plan, creating an administrative body to implement that plan, and authorizing the regulatory controls needed to carry it out. The master plan is a long-term blueprint that guides future land use and development. Many states require local governments to prepare these plans, which may be updated every 5 to 10 years. They integrate municipal goals with state and regional policies, balancing economic growth with environmental protection and quality of life. Planning objectives include controlling growth rates, how fast a city expands, determining growth patterns, what kind of development goes where, and ensuring adequate infrastructure such as sewage systems, roads, and public services. To develop the plan, planners research demographic trends, housing needs, employment patterns, environmental constraints, and regional influences. They then blend these findings into a unified vision for the community. Planning management is often handled by a planning commission, which reviews development proposals, adopts land use rules, and coordinates zoning, subdivision regulation, and public improvements. Their decisions shape how communities evolve over decades. Public land use control. Public regulation is the primary way government shapes land use. Through state laws, zoning ordinances, subdivision regulations, building codes, and public ownership tools such as eminent domain, government can regulate how land is used, developed, and transferred. Zoning, often considered the most powerful land use tool, stems from the state's police power delegated to local governments through enabling acts. A zoning ordinance divides a municipality into zones: residential, commercial, industrial, agricultural, public, or PUD, and establishes regulations for each. Zoning administration includes oversight by a zoning board of adjustment, which hears appeals and requests for relief when strict compliance creates hardship. Terms such as non-conforming use, variance, special exception, and zoning amendment all arise from this process. Subdivision regulation governs how land is divided, requiring approval of plats and compliance with state, county, and often FHA guidelines to ensure safety, infrastructure, and proper layout. Building codes set comprehensive standards for construction and materials and must be met before a certificate of occupancy is issued. Public acquisition occurs through eminent domain, which allows government to acquire private property for public use with just compensation. Eminent domain emphasizes that property rights, though strong, are not absolute and must sometimes yield to community needs. Private land use control. In addition to public regulations, private parties can impose land use restrictions through deed restrictions, declarations, and deed conditions. Deed restrictions limit how a single property may be used, often controlling architectural design, building size, or prohibited uses. They must comply with fair housing laws and cannot be discriminatory. Declaration restrictions apply to multi-property developments, such as subdivisions, condominiums, and PUDs. They function through CC and RS and are enforced by HOAS or through court injunctions. A deed condition is a private restriction that, if violated, can cause the property to revert to the prior owner. Although less common today, they still exist and can dramatically affect ownership rights. Environmental controls. Environmental oversight is a crucial part of land planning. Air, soil, and water quality are heavily regulated, and properties may be affected by ambient hazards, such as noise, flood zones, and seismic risk. Major legislation, including NEPA, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act, RCRA, CERCLA, and SARA, creates standards that influence where development may occur and what due diligence is required. Real estate professionals must understand their role in disclosure, the importance of environmental assessments, and how liability can attach under statutes like CERCLA. Owners, buyers, sellers, and sometimes agents may be responsible for remediation. For this reason, planning, zoning, and environmental law intersect closely. All three aim to protect the health, safety, value, and long-term sustainability of land. Closing remarks. This chapter ties together the full spectrum of how land is regulated, from the long-term vision of planning to day-to-day zoning and subdivision controls, to private restrictions imposed by owners, and finally to environmental protections governed by federal and state laws. Real estate exists within a complex framework that balances individual property rights with public interest and environmental stewardship. As a real estate professional, understanding how these layers interact allows you to guide clients effectively, anticipate regulatory challenges, and recognize when professional assistance is needed. Whether dealing with zoning questions, navigating CC and RS, evaluating environmental risks, or reviewing a development proposal, you now have the foundational knowledge to understand why these systems exist and how they shape every property transaction. Discussion: how does a master plan influence zoning decisions, subdivision layouts, and the approval of development proposals? Answer: the master plan sets long-term goals for land use, infrastructure, and growth, guiding zoning categories, density allowances, and subdivision requirements. Development proposals are evaluated based on whether they align with the plan's stated goals. Why might a deed restriction be more limiting than zoning? And how should professionals advise clients when the two conflict? Answer: zoning sets minimum standards, while deed restrictions can impose stricter controls. The more restrictive rule typically prevails. Professionals should advise clients to review both public and private controls before purchasing or developing property. How do environmental laws, such as the Clean Water Act and CERCLA, influence real estate development and due diligence? Answer: these laws impose strict standards and potential liability, requiring environmental assessments for certain properties, limiting development in protected areas, and requiring cleanup or mitigation when contamination is present. Why is it important for a real estate professional to understand both public and private land use controls when helping clients evaluate a property's potential? Answer: public controls regulate zoning and building, while private controls limit design, use, and ownership rights. Together, they shape what is legally and practically possible on a property.